We were already seeing a lot of returned GPUs the last several months, and now there's a little bit of a kicker. The RTX 4070, it came out just last month, and a lot of people bought it, and a lot of people who bought it figured that's going to be probably the last GPU that's 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Everything else is going to be likely 8. The 4060 Ti was supposed to be mainly just 8 gigabytes. Recently, we started getting these rumors that Nvidia was planning a 16 gigabyte version, and while it definitely came true, we didn't really know if it was likely or not, especially not a lot of 4070 buyers, and a lot of them are a little bit annoyed, and some of them are still within like a return period if they had like a 30-day return period, and if they bought it sometime, within that period. And put yourself in the position of an RTX 4070 owner. They just got a 12 gigabyte GPU that now there's a 4060 Ti $100 cheaper with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Yes, of course, a 4070 is still going to be faster than that 4060 Ti, but if most people remember last generation, the 3070 and 3060 Ti were actually pretty close. They weren't like that big of a difference. The 3060 was generally a lot different in a different tier of GPU, but in most people's minds, a 3060 Ti is just a little bit under a 3070. So if they look at a 4070 and a 4060 Ti and they see the 4060 Ti now has, 16 gigabytes of VRAM, when absolutely everybody is making a big deal that VRAM is important, that's going to make some people pause and wonder if they got a bad deal buying the 4070 and maybe even consider returning it. Now, this generation, the 4070 is probably going to be more different than the 4060 Ti because Nvidia's product stack has been more spaced apart in terms of the hardware differences, so it's not exactly the same as last generation. Even Nvidia now, they've been on this big thing trying to defend 8 gigabytes of VRAM. They're saying the L2 cache and various other things that are more on the GPU like the 4060 Ti and 4070 than they previously were on other GPUs like the 3060 Ti. They're saying that's going to make up for some of the bandwidth differences that we're seeing. And of course, that goes without saying, they're having all these, AI technologies to, pair with these GPUs. DLSS3 is going to be a big one. And of course, there's going to be like those, neural textures and things like that, which can give you a better visual experience while compressing things more, making the VRAM less likely to be as big of an issue going forward. But we're still kind of far away from a lot of that. And at the end of the day, there's no way around the fact that 8 gigabytes is still going to be way too little. And 12, while it's acceptable now, we can see that in many games, even at 1440p, we are already going to that barrier and surpassing it depending on how you do your graphics and your settings. If you buy something like a 4070, you would assume you can play at mostly, high or ultra settings, but it's not always the case. And now you have the 4060 Ti to look forward to, which is going to have more VRAM for less money. So that definitely doesn't explain it logically in terms of, a product stack. It explains it more in the manner that Nvidia probably made a mistake in terms of how they're releasing these GPUs, and they see the huge uproar that is being caused by having only 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and that's backed up by data, by tests. I bet you when they do internal tests, they can also see that 8 gigabytes of VRAM, if you want to use things like high textures and ray tracing, 1440p, even at 1080p, they already are showing limitations on 8 gigabyte GPUs. So they can't really go against that type of data. They can't really fool people. So that's why I think they're starting to release GPUs like a 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti in order to save some face, which still likely have a lot of complaints for these GPUs having 8 gigabytes of VRAM when these reviews finally come out. But at least now they can point to a 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti and say, look, we gave you more VRAM, and that's going to leave, 4070 and 4070 Ti owners sort of a little bit questioning why their GPU has less VRAM. Yes, of course, a 4070 Ti is going to perform at a whole different level than the 4070, even, of course, much more than a 4060 Ti, but it still stings a bit that that GPU only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. That's a fact you're not going to be able to overlook with a much higher performance in general, because there will be many situations and scenarios, not only in 4K on the 4070 Ti, but even 1440p, which is what this this GPU is supposed to have its main strength at that are going to show you problems with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Furthermore, the 192-bit memory bus is also an issue, even though it has more L2 cache, like Nvidia says, making the bandwidth not nearly as bad as you would think on paper. It's still going to be a limitation having that bandwidth where other things simply cannot replace it. So this is a pretty big problem for GPU buyers and Nvidia going forward. Remember, it's not just now that we have to make a decision on what GPU to buy. These GPUs are going to be around for years, just like people now make a decision if they buy an old 3070 or a 2080 Ti. Years from now, people are going to be looking on the secondhand market for a 4060 Ti or 4070, and they may think they're not going to want to buy that GPU because it only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. They may be pushed to going to maybe even the 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti or other AMD GPUs that may be older at that point, like a 6800 XT, 6800, all that are going to have considerably more VRAM, as that seems to be definitely an issue, not just the GPU brute force in other aspects or what features it has, like, tensor cores and being able to be, great at ray tracing. If you're limited by your VRAM, that seems to pretty much limit everything else, and gamers really don't want to see this happen anymore. And that's why I think Nvidia is starting to sort of respond to this by giving us more VRAM on a second option for a 4060 Ti. We'll see what happens in the actual reviews and in the future, but my opinion is it's still going to be way too expensive. $500 for that GPU should have been $399 for 16 gigabytes, and even the 4070 needs to be cheaper. So Nvidia has a big problem on their hands now that just makes it more confusing for consumers and gamers to choose the correct product. And when they do, there are a lot of drawbacks for the high price that you're paying. All right, guys, so let me know what you think about the 16 and 8 gigabyte GPUs down below. Do you think it's really going to make that big of a difference? Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.